Good morning, everyone. My name is Hashim Aziz, and I will be actually demonstrating my WeShare-MVC application for the server-side UI exercise. Here we will start at our official GitLab repository, and within this repository we can see my server-side UI exercise, which has been forked from our web development starters, is available. Uh, we will now start by actually getting the link, which we will clone or use to clone with SSH. Once that link is copied, we'll then navigate to our terminal. Once we're in our terminal, we will navigate to the specific folder in which we want to clone this repository so it can be accessed on our local machine. We cd into that folder, and now we do the actual git clone command, which is the official git clone command, to clone into the specific folder our remote repository locally. Once that has been done, we come to IntelliJ IDEA. In this case, this is my IDE of choice, and I'm actually going to open my project here within IntelliJ so that we can actually run our server. So we navigate then to the folder in which we clone this repository, and we open it. If I expand all the files and folders here, we see that all the main code base is available within this project for our WeShare server. We will then actually run our WeShare server, which will run the server on localhost 5050 locally on our machine. And now we will actually begin with the user journeys. The defined user journeys, which I'm going to be displaying here, have been provided to us in our WeShare user journeys.pdf by the Within Code curriculum. And these specific journeys will be followed from 1 to 5. In our first journey, we have a first time user login with an empty state. As you can see currently, our browser is displaying the index.html with the login form. And now that we have navigated to the index page, as per our first user journey, we will log in as a new user who is student 4 at wethinkcode.co.za. Note that the email input field uses the required CSS ID email, and when clicking the login button here, which I'm going to do, you invoke the /login.action. As we can see on our first page, we have the user. The user itself has a CSS ID over here of user. We have our expenses with the ID expenses. We have our payment request sent with the ID of payment request underscore sent. And there you can see that it is empty. We have the payment request received with the ID payment request underscore received, and then you've got logout student 4 over here, which has the ID of logout. If you go to our expense page, we have our add new expense button, which has the ID of add underscore expense, and then you don't have any expenses is written here, which has the ID no underscore expenses. If you go to our payment request sent, we see another message showing under the heading people that owe me that nobody owes us anything, and this has the ID no underscore payment underscore request underscore sent. And then if you go to the payment request received, we also have a list of people that owe us, or people that we owe, apologies, and that has the ID no payment request underscore received. As you can see, this is a new user, all the areas are empty, and we will actually be moving on to our second journey of capturing expense. But this time we'll be using another account, the account of student1 at wethinkcode.co.za, and we'll be logging in because they have existing expenses, and we are actually going to add an expense within this. When we log into student1, we see that student1 already has some expenses which exist. And as we can see, with with these expenses within our table, we have 6 columns. The when has the date of a year, and the date has an ID of date underscore, and then it would be the user ID of the specific expense, the ID of the specific expense, and then the what, which would be the description, would have an so airtime would have an ID of description underscore expense ID, and then amount spent again. This is all linking back to the expense ID. So it's going to be amount underscore and then the expense ID of that specific expense. And then payment requested would be request underscore expense ID. Payment received would be received underscore expense ID. And then net expense would be net underscore expense ID. Here we also have the total of the expenses which are provided at the bottom. This total carries the ID of grand underscore total. If we now click on the add a new expense button, which would remember the ID of would be add underscore expense, we can see a new form has been popped up. And in this form, we are actually going to fill out a specific expense, and we'll realize that here we were on the / expenses page. When we add a new expense, we are now on the / new expense page. And now when on the / new expense page and filling in the form, we have 3 fields here with 3 IDs. The first one of the description being description, the one of the date in this format holding today's date would be date, and the amount over here, which is very crucial, the specific CSS ID would be amount. And it is very important to note that the amount is only allowed rands. There are no cents allowed. So in this case, the total expense for this one would be 300 rand. Would submit that expense, and we would see that the expense for dinner has now been added. Our grand total has also increased to 700 rand due to the fact that the new expense of 300 rand for dinner has been added. Now the following journey is actually sending a payment request to another user in order for them to pay us for their part of the expense. I'll be showing that now, and we'll be using the expense we just created, which was dinner. So since I need to claim from student 3 for the dinner, I click on the dinner expense link. And as you see, when looking at the URL bar, this triggers a GET request with a query string, right? And this query string is in the format payment request question mark expense ID is equal to, and then the actual ID of the expense for for the specific expense for dinner is actually provided here. This ensures the request is linked to the correct parent expense. Now on this form, I enter the details of who is required to pay me, which is student 3 at withinco.co.za. The amount which I have to pay, which was 50%, which would be 150 Rand, and by when they should pay me. So the date of the payment should be the 30th, which would be 5 days for now. And if we have a look at the CSS IDs of everything, with regards to the payment request, we have the details of the expense, and these CSS IDs would be for the date, expense underscore date, for the description, expense underscore description, for the amount, expense underscore amount. And then for the form fields, the IDs would be email for the email, amount for the rand amount, and by when or would have the ID due underscore date. Now, when we submit this, we are actually going to the / payment request dot action when clicking the submit button. Now, when looking at the details of the specific expense and the payment request within it, we can see details have been added for the payment requests that have been made linked to this expense. And here we can see the who is owed, who owes us, apologies. So that is student 3, and that ID would be payment request underscore who underscore the ID of the expense specifically. So this ID that we have here, and then the date would be payment request underscore date underscore the ID of the expense. The payment request, whether it has been paid underscore the ID, and then how much would be payment request underscore amount underscore the ID. And then here, this ID for the total amount of payment requests requested for this expense would be total underscore payment requests. We now go back to the payment request sent area, and we can see it's been updated with this student 3 who owes us for dinner in 5 days for 150 Rand. We then move on to the next journey, which would be logging into our student 3 account and actually paying the specific payment request. So I'm now logging into the debtor student 3, press login, and I actually navigate to the payment request received area because now we know we requested. As we can see, there is the request made by student 1 for dinner for 150 Rand, and this is the one we are actually going to pay now. And if you go through the details over here, we actually see when we click in the pay button, we invoke the /payment dot action, right? And when clicking this, it changes to a tick mark. And we can see we have our total unpaid here, which has the ID of grand underscore total. Right. If we, after seeing that the payment mark is the payment tick has come here, we are unable to pay further because this amount has been settled, and we navigate to the expenses page where we see our payment request that we had paid has actually been added to our expenses, and our total expenses has been updated. So the dinner has been added and our total amount is now moved to 200 Rand. We now move to back to student 1 for the next part of the journey, where we will actually look at this payment request that has been successfully paid by student 3. So we navigate back to our index.html in this case. We are now logging into student 1, and when we are at student 1, we see that we have already been updated here in our expense page for our payment received of 150 Rand. And our net expense now is only 150 left here. When we go to our payment request sent, we see it is still there. But now we go to our payment to our dinner, and we can see now that whether the user has paid has been updated from false to true, indicating the payment was made now by student 3. Again, we have to look here at the top of the URL to see that we are within the query link where our payment request expense ID is equal to the expense ID for this dinner. And we can see that it's been paid. An entire life cycle journey from expense creation to payment settlement is functioning according to the user journeys. I will now do one further demonstration of a full journey with a user that we have not looked at yet, which is our user student2 at wethinco.co.za. We log into user 2 and we see we've already got a expense of 150 Rand here. And this is for movies. So now we are going to send it to our initial student that we've done who had no expenses, no requests sent, and no requests received. And we are actually going to ask them to pay 50% of the bill of the amount of 150 Rand. And we want that settled by tomorrow, the 26th of November, 2025. Now, again, we click the submit button. And when we do submit this, it's a / payment request or action. And before we go back to student 4, let's have a look at our payment request sent, and we can see that our 75 Rand has been sent. And we will log into student 4 now. Let's go to student 4, and you can see he doesn't have any expenses yet. Got payment request sent, nothing, but he's got a payment request received. And this is the one that we've just done in student 2. We're going to actually pay this, and we can see it's settled with that tick. And we are going to actually go back to expenses and see that now that we've paid that amount, it's been actually added to our paid expenses. Now, for one more time's sake, I will just be adding a new expense called test, and then that would be today, the 25th of November, 2025, and our amount is going to be 300 Rand, and we are going to submit that. And remember, when we submit that, we have the CSS ID. We have the CSS IDs here for description, for date, for amount, and then when we press the submit button, the action / expense.action is called, and you can see that has been added. I thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video. I'm happy to demonstrate this full life cycle from expense creation to payment settlement on another user's account is functioning fully according to the user journeys as specified in WeShare user journeys.pdf within the WeThink Code curriculum. Thank you.